A struggling farmer offers a simple kindness. He lets a delivery man rest in his old barn during an intense heat wave. 2 days later, a military helicopter descends onto his property with an urgent message that will change everything. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Roy Henderson's farmhouse had stood at the edge of Maple County for nearly a century, silently observing the changing times and the shifting fortunes of its owners. Set on a gentle slope that overlooked sprawling fields, it was a place of simple, quiet, rugged determination, and the faint echo of hard work woven into each weathered plank. Roy, a widower in his late 50s, prided himself on resilience. He rarely asked for help, living alone with his trusted cattle dog, Baxter, while tending his orchard and small herd. One scorching July afternoon, a heat wave descended upon Maple County with unrelenting force. The sun glared down, wilting leaves and browning the grass, as if daring any living thing to endure its fury. Roy's truck thermometer read 111 degrees Fahrenheit, an almost unheard-of temperature in that part of the state. The air felt thick, the horizon shimmering with heat mirages. Even Baxter, loyal and energetic, spent most of the day panting in the barn's shade, searching for any patch of cool earth he could find. On that same day, Roy was expecting a small delivery from a local courier service, some specialized feed supplements for his orchard, plus a batch of parts he'd ordered for his aging tractor. Normally, deliveries arrived early, before the sun hit its peak. But the old farm road was in rough shape. Delays weren't uncommon. By noon, Roy had almost given up on seeing the courier. Then he caught the distant hum of an engine, struggling along the dusty track that led up to his property. A battered white delivery van finally crested the hill, its driver clearly wrestling the wheel to avoid ruts in the road. Roy watched from his porch, arms folded across his chest, as the van rolled to a stop near the barn. A tall, thin man stepped out, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He was younger than Roy expected, maybe late 20s, with worry etched into his features. His uniform clung to him in the sweltering heat, dark patches marking the sweat. "Afternoon," Roy greeted, trying to sound friendly over the oppressive heat. "You look about ready to melt out here." The delivery man nodded, breath short from the scorching sun. He introduced himself as Donovan, apologizing for being late. Roy didn't mind. He offered Donovan a bottle of water from the porch cooler. The younger man drank gratefully, then started rummaging in the back of the van for Roy's packages. As the sun glared overhead, Donovan visibly swayed, fighting exhaustion and the punishing temperature that refused to relent. Roy noticed how unsteady the courier looked. He knew the signs of heat exhaustion too well: faintness, a glassy gaze, shallow breathing. "Look," Roy said, "why don't you step into the barn for a minute? Got a fan running in there and a place to sit. This sun'll fry you." Donovan hesitated, likely mindful of schedules and delivery quotas, but he was in no condition to argue. With a small nod of thanks, he followed Roy into the barn, seeking relief from the cruel midday blaze. The barn was cooler, relatively speaking. Roy pointed Donovan to a wooden bench near a giant, slow-turning fan, the hum of its blades offering a soothing background drone. Shafts of sunlight cut through cracks in the barn walls, illuminating dust motes that floated in the air. Baxter lifted his head from a shady corner, ears perked in mild curiosity. Roy handed Donovan another cold bottle. "Sit tight as long as you need," he said. "Heat like this will put you under if you're not careful." Donovan sank onto the bench, relief etched on his face. He admitted this was his first route in Maple County, and he'd underestimated the rough roads and the scorching temperatures. Roy recognized the man's mixture of pride and vulnerability. He'd seen it many times in workers pushing themselves to the brink, determined to meet deadlines. But Roy believed there was no shame in resting when necessary. "You can't deliver anything if you're passed out on the side of the road," he said gently. "So, take a breather." As the afternoon wore on, Donovan's color improved, though sweat still dripped from his brow. Roy offered him a simple lunch, fresh tomatoes from his garden and a couple of sandwiches. At first, the younger man refused, but hunger and exhaustion quickly changed his mind. Between bites, Donovan confided that he lived 2 counties away, was paying off medical bills for a sick relative, and needed every hour he could get. Roy listened quietly. The story struck a chord. Roy's late wife had endured a long hospital stay before passing, leaving him familiar with the weight of medical debt. In that moment, Roy decided he'd do more than just offer a seat in the shade. He insisted Donovan rest the night in the barn's loft. With the roads in poor condition and the heat showing no mercy, driving further was too risky. Donovan tried to protest company policy, schedules, the next day's deliveries, but Roy wouldn't hear it. "Better you make it late than not at all," he said. "Besides, I've got cots and bedding up there. You'll make your deliveries safer if you're not half dead." By sunset, Donovan had cleaned up at the farm's outdoor spigot and settled in the loft. Roy made sure he had enough water and even rigged up a second fan. The night air brought some relief, a gentle breeze rustling the orchard leaves. From below, Roy heard Donovan's occasional cough, the toll of heat exposure lingering. Baxter padded around, sniffing at the van's tires before curling up on the porch. Roy locked the barn door from outside, not to trap Donovan, but for security. Coyotes roamed after dark. 2 days passed swiftly. Donovan left the farm the next morning, grateful and restored. Yet in those 48 hours, Roy couldn't shake an odd feeling in his gut. The typical hush of rural life was disrupted by subtle changes. Helicopters passed overhead more than usual, their distant rotors thrumming in the sky. Strangers drove by, glancing at his property with unusual interest, and the local radio news mentioned some unknown military activity across the region, though details were scarce. Roy didn't dwell on it. He had chores to do, fences to mend, and apples to harvest. But still, that uneasy sense lingered at the back of his mind. On the second afternoon, just as Roy was finishing repairs to a water trough, an unfamiliar roaring echoed from above. He shielded his eyes against the glaring sun, scanning the sky for the source of the thunderous sound. What he saw made his heart stutter. A massive military helicopter, slate gray and imposing, descending steadily toward his orchard. Dust swirled in the yard, orchard trees bent under the force of the rotor wash, and Baxter barked furiously, uncertain whether to run or stand guard. Roy wiped his brow, a sudden chill creeping along his spine, despite the unrelenting heat. As the helicopter landed, its engine thundered so loudly that Roy's eardrums hummed. A side door slid open, revealing uniformed personnel. They jumped down in practiced motions, scanning the area like they expected threats behind every tree. A tall figure wearing aviator sunglasses stepped forward. The pilot removed her helmet, approached Roy, and addressed him by name. The polite yet firm tone made Roy's stomach tighten. "Mr. Henderson," the pilot said, "we have a message for you." Roy's mind raced with questions he couldn't begin to answer. The orchard fell silent, except for the helicopter's rumbling. One uniformed officer handed Roy a sealed envelope, the edges crisp, a stark contrast to the dusty farmland. Roy's hands trembled faintly as he accepted it. No return address, no official markings, just his name typed in neat capital letters across the front. The pilot gave a small nod. "We've been instructed to wait while you read it," she said. Her voice held a certain respect, as though Roy's reaction mattered more than he realized. Roy tore open the envelope, heart pounding. Inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few lines of text. As he read, confusion and worry warred on his face. The note thanked him for extending kindness to a critically important operative, whose life might have been endangered if not for Roy's hospitality. It stated that Donovan was, in fact, part of a sensitive military intelligence mission. Because Roy's actions allowed Donovan to recover safely, a crucial operation was completed without fail. The final words made Roy's throat tighten. "We owe you a debt. Expect further contact soon." Roy looked up in utter disbelief. The pilot and her crew stood at attention, their expressions unreadable. 1,000 questions churned in his mind. Why was Donovan involved in something so covert? What kind of debt could a military outfit possibly owe to a simple farmer? His voice, when it came, was hoarse. "I don't understand," he said. The pilot offered a handshake. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Because of you, lives were saved." Then, just as quickly as they'd appeared, the crew retreated to the helicopter, rotors revving. Within minutes, the aircraft lifted off in a vortex of dust and noise. Roy shielded his eyes, struggling to process what had just happened. Then the orchard was quiet again, as if the entire event had been a feverish dream. Yet the sealed note, clutched in Roy's trembling hand, proved it was real. Somewhere out there, a man he'd known only as Donovan was more than just a delivery driver, and Roy's kindness had changed the course of an unknown mission. Though he didn't yet realize it, Roy's life had just shifted onto a path from which there was no turning back. In the days that followed the helicopter's abrupt arrival, Roy tried to go about his usual routines with calm resolve, yet the weight of uncertainty pressed on him. Nights were fitful. He would lie awake in bed, running over the strange details in his mind. Donovan's exhaustion, the envelope's cryptic words, the peculiar mention of a debt. Sometimes Roy even wondered if he had imagined the whole thing. But by sunrise, he would see the barn's dust still swirling in the yard, lingering evidence of the helicopter's landing, and know that everything had indeed happened. Baxter sensed Roy's unease. The dog stayed close, following him from the orchard to the fields as though standing guard. Once or twice, Roy caught himself peering down the old farm road for any sign of unfamiliar vehicles. When nothing came, he tried to push aside the anxiety, focusing on more tangible concerns like orchard pests and cattle feed. By the end of that week, the oppressive heat had finally broken, replaced by a drizzle that brought the sweet scent of damp earth. One drab morning, as Roy was hauling feed to the troughs, a stark black SUV appeared in his driveway. The tires crunched on gravel, snapping Roy's attention away from the feed bucket. Two men stepped out. They wore collared shirts and slacks, their posture hinting at a trained confidence that didn't belong to traveling salesmen. Roy's pulse leapt, picturing crisp uniforms beneath those civilian clothes. Baxter stood stiffly, sensing tension. The shorter of the two men raised a hand in greeting. "Mr. Henderson?" he asked, voice polite yet brisk. Roy set the bucket down, wiped his hands on his jeans, and nodded. "Good morning," the shorter man continued. "We're here to discuss a matter of mutual interest. May we speak with you privately?" Without waiting for an answer, he cast a glance around the farmyard, as if verifying they were alone. Roy forced himself to stay calm. "Sure," he said, clearing his throat. "We can talk on the porch." He led them to the old wooden porch steps, where 3 chairs waited. The men offered no names, but they seemed to know every detail about Roy's background, where he'd grown up, how he'd inherited the farm from his uncle, even the medical history of Roy's late wife. Alarm bells rang in Roy's mind, though he kept his face composed. When he finally asked who they represented, they exchanged glances. "We're with a special branch that handles sensitive operations," the shorter man said, choosing his words carefully. "Donovan was one of ours. Your decision to let him recover here possibly saved his life." Then the taller man spoke. "We needed Donovan's intel. It's classified, but suffice to say, you helped ensure the success of a mission vital to national security. For that, we owe you." At the word owe, Roy's posture hardened. He didn't like the implication of trades or obligations. "I wasn't expecting any kind of reward," he said. "Man needed help and I helped. I'm not sure how that puts me in your debt or vice versa." The tall man removed a sealed folder from an inside pocket. "We'd like you to keep this." He extended it toward Roy. Inside, Roy found documents offering something that made his jaw clench: official clearance to contact specialized government agencies for emergency support, plus a phone number for operational assistance. It was so vague, Roy almost laughed, but the final pages made him swallow hard. A property deed for a small parcel of government land adjacent to his orchard, transferred to Roy's name at no cost. "Is this for real?" Roy murmured, stunned. The men assured him it was. The documents had the appropriate stamps and signatures, though Roy could tell everything had been processed under a haze of secrecy. It was a gesture of gratitude, they said, to guarantee Roy remained unencumbered by farmland boundaries, and to ensure he had a direct line of protection if trouble ever found him. Then, with brisk nods, the men stood and walked back to their SUV. Before leaving, the taller man paused. "We ask only that you refrain from speaking publicly about Donovan's overnight stay, the helicopter, or this conversation." His tone was cordial but carried an unmistakable edge. Within moments, they were gone, leaving Roy with that stack of papers in his lap. The morning breeze rustled them, as if to remind him this was no fantasy. Baxter whined softly, unsettled by Roy's tension. Roy gently patted the dog's head. "I know, boy," he whispered. "I don't like it either." For several days, Roy avoided touching the mysterious documents. He slid them into a drawer beneath old receipts, hoping out of sight truly meant out of mind. Chores piled up, and he threw himself into them, repairing worn fence posts and planning the next orchard cycle. But an undercurrent of worry flowed through him. Questions of what might happen next, whether he was now entangled in matters far beyond his understanding. Then came an afternoon phone call that rattled Roy to his core. The voice on the other end belonged to Evelyn Maddox, a longtime friend and local attorney. She asked if he could stop by her office in town to discuss urgent documents concerning Henderson Farm. Roy's first thought was the newly transferred deed. Had someone discovered it? He mumbled an excuse, but Evelyn gently insisted, "This might be bigger than we realize." Nerves gnawing at his stomach, Roy drove into town. Main Street was half empty, the heat having returned with a vengeance after that brief cool spell. Locals scurried from store to car, anxious to get home or somewhere air-conditioned. Roy parked by the aging law office, the wooden sign outside peeling at the edges. Inside, he found Evelyn waiting with a grave look. She wore her usual black blazer, her thick hair pinned back. On her desk lay a stack of official-looking forms, similar to those Roy had received. She gestured for him to sit. "Roy, I don't know what you've gotten into," Evelyn began, "but I got a letter from a federal contact referencing farmland expansions and certain government benefits. It's heavily redacted, but your name is all over it." Roy stared, uncomprehending. Did they seriously loop a local attorney into hush-hush business? Or had the attorney discovered it on her own? Evelyn rummaged through the stack, pulling out a typed page. "It basically states that some adjacent land is being granted to you. No fee, no explanation. It also includes disclaimers about confidentiality. Roy, I know you're not the type to dance around the truth. What on earth is going on?" Roy exhaled slowly, deciding to share only fragments of the story. He admitted that a courier had shown up in dire shape, and later a helicopter had delivered a message of thanks. He didn't mention Donovan's real identity or the shadowy men who'd visited. Evelyn listened with widening eyes, her expression a mixture of amazement and worry. "I've never heard of the government doing something like this," she said. "But if all the deeds and disclaimers check out, it's legal. That means you do indeed own that extra parcel now." Roy shook his head. "I don't feel comfortable with any of this. I just gave the man a place to rest. It wasn't a big deal. Evelyn frowned. It must have been a big deal to someone. Roy, you need to decide if you'll accept this land. If you do, you might be stepping into a swirl of complications. If you don't, you could anger people who seem very powerful. Either way, you have to be cautious. Outside, the sun blazed on the dusty sidewalk. As Roy headed to his truck, the enormity of the situation sank in. He was now officially bound up with folks who operated behind closed doors. Was it simply gratitude, or were they tying up a loose end, ensuring Roy's loyalty through a subtle bribe? By the time Roy returned to the farm, the orchard's soothing hush felt almost mocking. Everything looked the same. His old water pump, the crooked fence line, the distant fields where cattle grazed. Yet Roy sensed an invisible boundary had been crossed. Acceptance of that extra land was acceptance of a secret. Rejection, on the other hand, might draw unwelcome attention. He found himself pacing the porch, lost in thought. Late that evening, Baxter's barks shattered the silence. Roy stepped out, scanning the dark. Headlights glowed at the entrance to the farm road. He tensed, half expecting more unnamed visitors, but the silhouette belonged to a battered pickup. As it neared, Roy recognized the driver, his longtime friend Jody Webb, who managed a ranch a few miles over. Jody climbed out, removing her sun-faded cap. "Roy, my generator's busted," she said, frustration evident. "Hate to ask so late, but I need a spare part or my livestock's water supply will fail." Relieved that it was only a friend, Roy sighed and nodded. "Come on in. We'll see what we have." In the workshop, Jody explained how her generator seized under the heat, and local stores wouldn't open until morning. Roy rummaged through boxes until he found a used but functional starter. He handed it over with a wry smile. "Try this. If it doesn't work, I can come by tomorrow." Jody thanked him. Just before leaving, she paused, reading the anxiety etched on Roy's face. "You sure you're all right?" she asked. He hesitated, then forced a reassuring grin. "Just a lot on my mind. Don't worry about me." Jody seemed unconvinced, but she let it go. Roy watched her headlights disappear into the night, that sense of dread creeping back. People like Jody, people who'd known him for decades, they had no idea he was now tangled in something far bigger than farm repairs. That night, Roy slept restlessly. At dawn, he grabbed the phone number in the sealed folder, his heart hammering. He wanted answers. Some clarification about whether he could just walk away from this gift. The call rang 3 times before a voice answered, crisp and direct. Roy took a breath and identified himself, then laid out his concerns. The person on the line listened politely, said they'd forward the request, and promised a follow-up within 72 hours. Then they hung up. Little did Roy know that simple phone call would set in motion a chain of events that would change Maple County's tranquility forever. In less than 3 days, Roy's farm would host visitors far more unsettling than suits in black SUVs. He would soon learn that quiet acts of kindness can sometimes carry the heaviest consequences, and a farmer's simple life can collide with unimaginable secrets lurking just beyond the horizon. Over the next 3 days, Roy's phone remained stubbornly silent. No cryptic texts, no curt messages, and certainly no voice on the other end to clarify his predicament. He tried to keep busy with orchard tasks, but the tension gnawed at him. Sleep eluded him at night as he considered every possible angle. Were they testing his patience, or perhaps verifying whether he would comply with their hush-hush demands? Each time he revisited the notion of discarding that newly granted parcel, a cold knot of fear took hold. What if refusal implied ingratitude, or worse yet, defiance? On the 4th morning, Roy woke before dawn, his heart skipping, when an unfamiliar beep broke the pre-dawn hush. He realized it came from a second cell phone, the cheap, unmarked device included in the sealed folder. He'd left it charging in the kitchen, ignoring it until now. Dread pooled in his gut as he picked it up. A single text message glowed on the screen. Package arrival, 1100 hours. Provide safe passage. The cryptic words sparked an anxious swirl of speculation. Package? Safe passage? Roy rubbed his temples, Baxter pressing close by, both of them unsettled by the day ahead. Though Roy had no idea what that message signified, he had a hunch it related to Donovan's situation. Perhaps some new operative was headed his way. He reread the text half a dozen times, searching for clues. The mention of 1100 hours suggested a precise schedule, almost military in nature. He didn't want to comply blindly, but ignoring it might mean trouble. After finishing chores with shaking hands, he decided to do as the instructions implied. He unclipped the chain on his gate, ensuring that any arriving vehicle could pull right up to the barn. Then he waited, nerves on edge. A little after 10:30, Roy heard the low rumble of an approaching truck. He braced himself, scanning the horizon. To his relief, it wasn't some menacing convoy, but a nondescript green pickup. The windows were tinted, giving no hint of who sat inside. Roy hovered by the barn, chest tightening when the truck slowed near the orchard. Finally, it parked under a large oak. The engine idled. A moment later, the passenger door opened, and a figure stepped out, an older man in plain clothes, leaning on a cane. His face was etched with lines of fatigue, yet he offered Roy a polite nod. "Are you Roy Henderson?" the stranger asked in a tone of forced calm. Roy nodded cautiously. The man introduced himself only as Finch, offering no rank or agency. "I was told you'd be expecting me," Finch said, tapping the cane lightly on the ground. "I carry something that needs safeguarding." At that, the driver stepped from the truck's far side, gingerly lifting a sealed metal case from the rear seat. Roy's stomach flipped at the sight of it. He was about to protest, to insist he wasn't a warehouse. But Finch's steady gaze suggested refusal would spark consequences Roy dared not invite. They disappeared into Roy's barn, the man with the cane moving slowly, as though each step cost him. Once inside, Finch handed Roy a slip of paper with numbers scrawled in neat rows. "This is the storage code. The box is keyed to your fingerprint, so we need you to press your thumb on the scanner." Roy balked, chest tightening. "Wait, hold on, I don't even know what's inside this thing." Finch's mouth formed a tight line. "Better if you don't." The moment Roy's thumb touched the scanner, a green light blinked. Finch exhaled. "That's it. You've accepted custody." Roy felt a surge of alarm. "Custody of what? I'm not looking to be part of whatever scheme this is." Finch turned away, stepping gingerly toward the barn door. "I'm aware. But let's say your involvement has already been decided." The words held no malice, merely resignation. Roy stared at the sealed case, its metal gleaming dully in the barn's dim light. The driver who'd carried it had vanished back to the truck. Finch tapped Roy's arm softly. "Expect additional instructions soon," he said. "Protect the case. Under no circumstance let it leave your possession." Then he left without another word. The green pickup rattled away, leaving Roy alone with the confounding metal box and a swirl of dread. Even Baxter seemed perturbed, circling the case and sniffing it warily. Roy considered hauling it to the orchard and burying it, or maybe calling Evelyn for legal advice. But something told him no lawful recourse existed for this madness. The code slip remained clutched in his hand. One side read 4/22/19, which might have been a date or a random sequence. The other side listed sets of digits, possibly coordinates or an access key. Roy felt trapped in a puzzle not of his making. By midday, tension escalated. Roy's mind wandered through worst-case scenarios. Maybe the case contained classified intel or a device with lethal potential. The secrecy implied serious ramifications if it fell into the wrong hands. He found himself glancing at the barn door every few minutes, half expecting men in suits or armed squads to storm in. Instead, The day's hours dragged on with normal farm chores. Roy fed the cattle, repaired a broken fence board, and tried to pretend he wasn't harboring a metal container that might alter the course of his life forever. Near sunset, a battered sedan arrived at the farm. Roy tensed, but from the driver's seat emerged Charlotte Garvey, a local orchard supplier who occasionally sold produce from Roy's land. She wanted to finalize an order for apples, unaware of the clandestine drama unfolding. Roy forced a smile, gripping his hat to hide his trembling hands. Charlotte chatted about market demand, pricing, and whether Roy planned to expand his orchard's variety. Each time she asked a normal question, Roy felt a pang of envy. He wished he still lived solely in that straightforward world of supply, demand, and neighborly transactions. Once Charlotte left, Roy lingered by the front gate, watching dust settle behind her sedan. The sky was streaked with pink and orange, the day's heat finally ebbing. Still, he couldn't shake the sense of looming danger. A single phone beep jolted him. The unmarked phone again lighting up with a message. Confirm safekeeping. Status check needed. Roy typed a tentative reply. Case is secure. Awaiting instructions. Immediately the phone displayed. Acknowledged. Stand by for further comms. Roy stared at the screen, dreading what might come next. He realized he was in deeper than he ever wanted. That night, he tried to sleep in his usual bed, but anxiety led him to drag a cot into the barn. He positioned it near the sealed metal case. Baxter curled up beside him, ears twitching at every unfamiliar sound. The barn's rafters creaked gently in the breeze. No intruders came, though Roy remained wide awake for hours, nerves buzzing. At some point, exhaustion overcame him, plunging him into a restless doze. He dreamt of helicopters overhead, their searchlights sweeping the orchard, and he clutched the case in terror, convinced the entire farm was about to be swallowed by shadows. Dawn arrived in a pale glow. Roy sat up stiffly on the cot, silently acknowledging that he'd passed some invisible threshold. His life no longer revolved around the orchard's harvest schedule or the quiet satisfaction of solitary labor. Now, unseen forces dictated his every move. He brewed coffee in his kitchen, swallowing the bitter taste along with his dread. The phone in his pocket felt like a ticking clock, ready to ring at any moment. He glanced at the orchard. No matter what came next, Roy vowed to guard his land and the secrets thrust upon him, with unflinching resolve. He finished his coffee in thoughtful silence, steeling himself for whatever command might arrive that day. Though every instinct told him to run, to discard the case and vanish, his conscience reminded him of Donovan and that one evening of mercy. If his small act had saved lives, maybe there was a reason he was chosen. Outside, Baxter chased a squirrel across the yard, blissfully unaware of the danger swirling around them. Roy forced a shaky smile and patted the case's metal surface. "I don't know what you are," he murmured, "but I'll keep you safe." By midday, the sweltering sun glared overhead, the dusty fields shimmering as Roy walked his fence line, trying to salvage a sense of normalcy. He decided the best way to cope with anxiety was to stay active. Yet his mind never fully strayed from the barn. Each time the breeze rustled through the orchard or Baxter barked at a passing bird, Roy's pulse would spike, convinced the phone might buzz or some unmarked vehicle might roll up. But the hours crept onward uneventfully, leaving him more on edge than before. At lunch, Roy settled on the porch with a simple sandwich, scanning his property for anything out of place. In the distance, he saw a vague swirl of dust, the kind a car made when turning off the main road. He tensed, but the swirl vanished, leaving him unsure whether it had ever been real. The phone remained silent, and so Roy forced himself to finish his lunch. The orchard needed watering. His tractor coughed and sputtered, but after some coaxing it churned to life, allowing him to drag out the irrigation lines. He tried to lose himself in the hum of machinery, ignoring the swirl of bigger troubles in his head. He was nearly done with the row when he noticed a pair of men standing at the edge of his fields. They hadn't been there a moment ago. Both wore jeans and collared shirts like off-duty farmhands. But Roy knew the posture, tense, alert, arms stiff at their sides. He turned the tractor off, hopped down, and strolled over. Baxter followed, ears angled forward. The men did not smile. One was older, with deeply lined cheeks and salt and pepper stubble. The other looked no more than 30, hair cropped short. They watched Roy approach, eyes flicking to the orchard and the barn beyond. "Morning," Roy said, mustering politeness. "Can I help you boys with something?" The older man dipped his head. "We're from the cooperative doing a quick survey," he replied, "checking soil quality in the region." Roy frowned. Maple County's co-op occasionally sent folks around, but they usually sent postcards first, giving notice. He saw no equipment with them, no sampling kits, nothing. Their clothing might fit a local, but the vibe was off. Too stiff, too practiced. Roy's skin prickled in warning. He waited for them to continue, but the younger man offered no further explanation, merely let his gaze linger on Roy's barn. Roy cleared his throat. "Soil's the same as it's ever been," he said, voice cool. "I manage it fine on my own." The older man gave a small nod. "Understood. Just making our rounds." They exchanged a brief stare, then turned to leave, footsteps crunching on the dry earth. Roy noticed they headed not toward a parked vehicle, but toward the orchard's boundary, where the land dipped. Within seconds, they were out of sight behind the orchard's first row of trees. Baxter whined, uneasy at the encounter. Roy quickly climbed onto the tractor and circled around, hoping to catch a glimpse of how the men were leaving the property. To his bafflement, there was no sign of them anywhere. He scanned the orchard edges. No figure moved amid the leafy branches. He gazed down the farm road. No dust cloud marked their departure. It was as though they'd melted into the landscape, and Roy didn't like that one bit. He considered calling out, but the hush of the orchard swallowed any words. Shaken, he returned the tractor to the barn and shut the doors securely. Maybe they were merely drifters, yet everything in Roy's gut said they'd been surveilling him. He decided to check the sealed metal case stashed in the barn. It appeared undisturbed. Roy hadn't touched it beyond that single fingerprint scan. The memory of Finch's cryptic instructions re-emerged. He leaned against a support beam, wiping sweat from his brow, fighting the sense of entrapment. If men were snooping around now, it likely meant others were too. He doubted Finch or Donovan's clandestine backers would appreciate prying eyes. Roy briefly debated calling the special phone for guidance, but the memory of how each request for clarity only deepened. The quagmire stopped him. By late afternoon, Roy's anxiety had ebbed enough to let him do normal chores. He refilled the cattle's water trough, harvested a small batch of pears, and tidied up the yard. His thoughts kept drifting to the strangers. He replayed their speech, their expressions, the direction they departed. Did they represent a rival agency? Criminals looking for a payoff? Roy realized how little he knew about Donovan's cause. He had no real idea what lines he might be crossing. At dusk, Roy locked the barn carefully, then retreated to his kitchen to fix supper. A second day of oppressive heat had drained his appetite. He settled for a reheated stew, then sat at the table, lights turned low. Baxter dozed in the corner, occasionally thumping his tail. As shadows lengthened, Roy flipped through the official pages in the sealed folder, searching for some hint of what to do if confronted by suspicious parties. The language was maddeningly vague, filled with phrases like "uphold security at all costs" and "contact support only upon confirmation of immediate threat." He cursed softly under his breath. They wanted him to guard a secret, while giving him no playbook for how to survive it. Night rolled in, silent and humid. Roy dozed fitfully on the sofa, half-dressed, gun resting on the side table. He was no firearms enthusiast, but the farm had a rifle for coyotes, and the old revolver he kept from his father's time. He hadn't felt a need to keep a weapon close in years, yet now it brought him some measure of comfort. Around midnight, Baxter barked, jolting Roy awake. He leapt up, heart thudding. Outside, the yard was eerily still. Roy flicked on a porch light. Nothing. Perhaps a stray raccoon had spooked the dog. Roy exhaled, returning to the sofa, nerves ablaze. The next morning, Roy decided he couldn't remain in the dark. He would try the unmarked phone again, demand some kind of clarity about watchers on his property. After a hasty breakfast, he dialed, voice firm, when an automated prompt answered. "Yes, this is Roy Henderson. I'm reporting suspicious individuals trespassing on my land. I need to know who they might be, and I need to know how to respond." The line clicked, then beeped, then cut to static. The phone's screen blinked. Message received. He stared at those words, frustration mounting. It had all the warmth of a brick wall. No one spoke to him. Was he truly left to handle potential threats alone, armed with nothing but an intangible promise of backup? Roy ground his teeth, wishing he'd never let Donovan inside. Better to have let the man rest in his van, or so he told himself in his darker moods. Later that afternoon, Evelyn, the attorney, called. She wanted to confirm some references for the farmland extension. Roy tried to keep his voice steady, but she sensed tension. "You all right, Roy? You sound rattled." He paused, considering how much to reveal. "Just some folks wandering around," he managed, asking weird questions, checking the orchard. "Don't feel right." Evelyn didn't pry, but she suggested Roy contact the sheriff if it happened again. Roy half chuckled. "Sure, but I doubt our sheriff can do much if this is something bigger." Evelyn sighed. "Roy, I don't like hearing that. If you need me, call, day or night." He thanked her and hung up, feeling a pang of gratitude. At least Evelyn had his back. Yet he couldn't burden her with secrets that might put her at risk. The entire predicament felt like a slow-moving avalanche he had no power to stop. 3 more days slipped by. Each dawn found Roy exhausted, eyes rimmed with dark circles. His orchard's demands kept him physically busy, but mentally he was unraveling. No new text messages came through the unmarked phone. No further visitors arrived at the farmhouse. He almost convinced himself the crisis might blow over. Perhaps the case was a decoy, never to be retrieved. Perhaps the men in the orchard had spooked themselves, giving up. Roy tried to resume a semblance of daily life, forcing calm as he fed Baxter, repaired equipment, and even spent an hour reading an old farm journal. But on the 7th morning since Finch's appearance, Roy got a rude awakening. He was in the orchard, checking for signs of blight, when the distant drone of an aircraft reached his ears. Instantly, his heart slammed. Another helicopter? With shaky hands, he clutched binoculars, scanning the skies. Sure enough, a black dot approached, growing larger by the second. It was coming in low, following the ridgeline. Roy's mind flashed to the first helicopter that had landed, delivering that ominous note. Anxiety coiled in his gut like a snake. He raced back to the barn, barking at Baxter to stay put. As the helicopter neared, Roy saw it was different from the previous military craft. Sleeker, with tinted windows, no visible insignia. It hovered above his field, rotor wash flattening the grass. Roy braced himself against the barn door, adrenaline surging. The chopper's side door slid open, and to his shock, 2 figures leapt out, parachute packs catching the air for the briefest moment. They landed roughly in the tall grass, quickly disentangling themselves, the helicopter thumping away without fully touching down. Roy's mind reeled. This was a direct infiltration, no attempt at subtlety. Who were they? The helicopter soared off, leaving the 2 newcomers to scramble upright. From across the field, Roy saw them glance toward his farmhouse, the same expression of urgency he'd witnessed in those orchard watchers. A surge of anger and fear warred within him. He wasn't sure if these people were from Finch's outfit or from some rival group. All he knew was that they were obviously trained, now trekking across his property as if they owned it. Roy inhaled and marched out of the barn, rifle in hand, not pointed, but held in plain view. He had to show he wouldn't be bullied. Baxter trotted at his heels, ears low. The two figures raised their hands halfway in a gesture that might have been caution or greeting. One was a woman with short blonde hair, wearing black fatigues. The other was a man, stocky and broad-shouldered, with a grim set to his jaw. Both had sidearms strapped to their thighs. The blonde woman shouted over the diminishing rotor roar. "We're here for the case," she said. Her voice carried an accent Roy couldn't quite place. "Stand down, farmer. We don't want trouble." Roy's mouth went dry. His mind spun, recalling Finch's directive to guard the metal box. Were these the rightful owners or thieves? He gripped the rifle tighter. "I'm not handing over anything," he called back, forcing resolve he didn't fully feel. "I have no idea who you are." They exchanged a brief look, the man's scowl deepening. Then the woman took a cautious step forward. "We're authorized. Show us the code slip Finch gave you. We'll confirm." Roy kept the rifle at the ready, blood pounding in his ears. There it was again, that assumption that he'd bow to demands from strangers. He racked his thoughts for a solution, aware that if they were genuine, they would have passphrases or some sign of legitimacy. Yet how could he be sure they weren't lying? Roy stood motionless in the field, rifle loosely cradled, while the two parachutists kept their hands raised just enough to signal caution. The blonde woman repeated, "We're here for the case." Her accent was subtle, possibly Eastern European or somewhere close. Roy couldn't tell. He only knew this was the second time in recent days that strangers had demanded access to the metal box in his barn, and these two didn't seem like they would accept a polite refusal. Baxter sidled up to Roy, hackles raised. The stocky man took a single step forward, scanning the orchard. "We are authorized," he said, echoing his partner's words. "Show me the slip with your code." Roy's throat felt dry. Did that slip truly signify something official? Finch had given him those scribbled digits without explaining how to verify a claimant. For all Roy knew, these new arrivals could be criminals. He stared down the length of his rifle. "I'm not showing you anything. If you've got some official clearance, prove it." His voice wavered slightly, a thread of uncertainty creeping in. He'd never confronted armed operatives before, and the last thing he wanted was gunfire on his farmland. The blonde woman exhaled. "We expected more cooperation," she said under her breath. Then, more loudly, "Look, we have a passphrase. Finch told us you'd require it." She cleared her throat. "Daffodil, code 42219, Region M." The words made Roy's pulse jump. 42219 matched the slip of paper he carried. The mention of Finch sealed it. Unless this was an elaborate ploy, they had inside knowledge. Still, Roy didn't lower the rifle. "If Finch told you, then say the rest." He wasn't sure if there even was more to the passphrase, but it felt safer to push. The two strangers exchanged a tense glance. Then the man spoke carefully, like he was reciting lines. "Region M, sub-designate Alpha. Clearance indefinite." Roy recognized those references from the back of his code slip. Though he hadn't understood them, his heart hammered. Whoever these two were, they seemed to know details only Finch or Donovan's network could have shared. After a pause, Roy allowed the rifle's barrel to angle down, but he kept it ready in case they tried anything rash. "Fine. Maybe you're legit," he muttered. "But I'm not handing it over until I know exactly who you are and what's inside that box, because I sure as hell don't appreciate how this was dumped on me." The man slid a quick, sidelong look toward his partner, who shrugged as if to say, "The farmer has a right to be upset." "I'm Talia," said the blonde. "This is Parrish." We handle retrieval of specialized packages. Finch's group told us you'd been given custody. That's all I can explain. I realize it's not satisfying, but our mission is to ensure safe transport." Roy licked his lips, debating. If they truly were from the same network, maybe letting them take the burden off his hands was the best move. Yet an unsettling memory returned. Finch had said to expect instructions from him, not from others. Had something changed? Talia seemed to read his hesitation. "We were deployed early," she explained. "Certain unfriendlies caught wind of the asset. We had to scramble to get here before they do." The word unfriendlies sent a chill along Roy's spine. He thought of the two men lurking by his orchard fence, the sense they might have vanished into the trees. Maybe there was an invisible tug-of-war over that case, with Roy stuck in the middle. He drew a steadying breath. "All right, come to the barn. We'll see about verifying your story." He cast a glare at Parrish. "But if either of you tries anything, I'll protect my property. Understood?" Parrish gave a curt nod. "Understood." Together they crossed the field. Baxter padded alongside, still bristling. Talia and Parrish kept their hands in sight, clearly adept at moving silently, even in the tall grass. Roy's mind raced, reeling from how quickly his quiet orchard had become a stage for clandestine operations. When they reached the barn, Roy unlatched the door and pushed it open. The interior was dim and stuffy, dust motes swirling in the beams of sunlight. The sealed metal case sat precisely where Roy had left it. Talia's gaze sharpened at once. Parrish exhaled, relief evident. "Good," he muttered. "It's intact." They approached the box as though it contained something delicate or deadly, maybe both. Roy stood back, rifle in hand, ready for any unexpected move. Talia lowered herself beside the case, feeling along its edges. Then she glanced at Roy. "We'll input the code from the slip. Let's confirm." Roy eyed her warily, then fished the folded scrap of paper from his back pocket. He moved close enough so she could see it, but not close enough to let her snatch it. Talia nodded. "Those numbers match our data. Now we just need your fingerprint again to unlock." Roy grimaced, recalling how Finch had forced that print scan on him. "And then you walk off with it?" he said, voice tight. "I was told to protect this at all costs." Parrish joined Talia's side, flipping open a small data pad. "Your instructions were to await retrieval by authorized personnel with the correct passphrase. That's us," he said. "If you want confirmation, call Finch. But we don't have long. Others might arrive soon." Roy's frustration flared. He hated being rushed, especially with so many unanswered questions, but that mention of possible hostiles overshadowed his reluctance. A pang of self-preservation told him these two might be the only hope for removing that cursed box from his land. He scoffed. "Fine, let's do it. But don't expect me to keep my guard down." He kneeled, pressing his thumb where Talia indicated. The device beeped. Talia input the numeric code. A soft click. The case's lid shifted, though she didn't open it fully. Roy craned his neck, trying to catch a glimpse, but Talia carefully angled the lid. She peered inside, breath catching as if verifying precious cargo. Parrish gave a tight nod. "Looks good. Seal it up. Let's get out of here." Part of Roy wanted to demand a look, but the hush of their manner, the flicker of alarm in Talia's eyes, told him this was not something he truly wished to behold. Whatever sat in that metal box was wrapped in layers of secrecy too deep for him. Talia shut the lid, locking it again. She exhaled as though relieved. "We'll load it on a small ATV we've stashed," she said. "Easier to navigate the orchard than a truck. Then we rendezvous with a second team. Should be out of your hair within the hour." Roy's tension began to ease, replaced by wariness. "This place is my livelihood," he said quietly. "You drop from the sky, you slip away, and I'm left with 1,000 questions. I guess I'd like some assurance that I'll be done with this. No more visitors." Talia and Parrish exchanged glances. Parrish gave a wry shrug. "That's the plan," he said. "Finch's team needed a temporary custodian, and you obliged. We're removing the problem. Everyone wins." Roy almost laughed. Wins? He'd lost weeks of sleep, endured bizarre intrusions, found armed watchers on his property, all because he'd shown a stranger a small kindness. But if giving them the case meant an end to the madness, it would be worth it. A flicker of doubt made him hesitate. What if Finch truly wanted to handle it himself? But then, he remembered the passphrases matched. He had little choice but to trust them. They maneuvered the box outside, each of them gripping a handle. Roy stepped aside while Parrish whistled, and from a row of orchard trees emerged a compact ATV, camouflage tarp draped across its rear cargo area. Talia and Parrish hoisted the case into the cargo bed, strapping it down with methodical precision. Roy's stomach lurched at how practiced they were. This was standard procedure for them, like farmers loading feed. He tried to find relief in the idea that soon the burden would vanish from his barn. Moments later, with a sputter and a rev, the ATV tore across a narrow path between orchard rows. Talia drove, Parrish perched behind her, weapon visible at his hip, one hand securing the case. Roy watched them vanish into the orchard gloom. He stood alone in the barnyard, rifle clutched tight, dust swirling around his boots. Baxter sniffed the ground where the two operatives had stood, letting out a low whine. Roy's heart hammered. Everything had changed in mere minutes. If Talia and Parrish were truthful, the box was gone from his life forever. If they were lying, he might have just handed lethal contraband to criminals. Uncertainty thrummed through him. He replayed the tension in Talia's voice, the references to Finch, the passcodes. It all matched too closely to be a random scam, yet there was no sense of triumph, only hollow relief. Feeling oddly unsteady, Roy placed his rifle aside. He wiped sweat from his brow, swallowed, then reached for the unmarked phone in his pocket. Might as well see if Finch had responded. As he turned it on, an incoming text flashed. "Status update requested. Is asset secure?" Roy stared at the screen in disbelief. That message had arrived just minutes before Talia and Parrish showed up. So they were out of sync? Or was Finch's group verifying the transfer? With trembling fingers, Roy typed, "Case retrieved by your team." They used passphrase. "Gone now." He pressed send, mind swimming in confusion. The phone showed no immediate reply. Roy waited, each second an echo of dread. Then finally a short line appeared. "We have no team available. Secure asset until further notice." Roy's entire body went cold. He read the message twice, unable to believe his eyes. No team available? That meant Talia and Parrish weren't authorized by Finch after all. Roy shut his eyes, pulse roaring in his ears. A single horrifying truth sank in. The box had been stolen, and he had unwittingly handed it over. Roy's entire body went cold. He reread the text on the unmarked phone, pulse hammering in his ears. The final message was so stark in its implications. No team available, secure the asset until further notice. Yet the asset was gone, driven away by two people claiming Finch's authority. When the words finally sank in, Roy staggered back against the barn wall, voice choked by panic. He had delivered the sealed case straight into the hands of unknown figures who'd parachuted onto his land. The sense of betrayal and dread gnawed at him, and Baxter whimpered at his side, picking up on Roy's alarm. He stood there in the barn's dusty gloom, heart pounding like a panicked drumbeat. Outside, the orchard was still, save for the gentle rustle of leaves in a faint breeze. The stolen box had vanished mere minutes earlier, whisked away on that small ATV. Roy had given them everything they needed, so certain he was ridding himself of the burden. Now he realized he'd been deceived from the start. He clenched his fists, cursing himself for not verifying first with Finch. The horse was out of the barn now, literally and figuratively. His immediate urge was to call Finch's line again, to explain or apologize, but even that felt futile. The text's final instructions were unmistakable. Finch thought Roy still had the case, safe and hidden. How could Roy admit he'd already lost it? The possible repercussions twisted his gut. Would they think he was complicit in theft, or incompetent enough to cost them something vital? He braced himself, forcing a slow breath. Regardless of consequences, Finch had to know the truth. Only they might track down Talia and Parrish. Roy pressed the phone to his ear, redialing the contact number from memory. It rang a few times, then clicked to an automated message. "Report status," a mechanical voice prompted. Roy swallowed. "The box. Someone took it," he said hoarsely. "They had your passphrase, said they were retrieval agents. I believed them." Silence. The phone system beeped once, then cut the line. Roy pulled the device away, glaring in frustration. That was it. No real-time person to question him. No immediate demand for an explanation. He felt both relief and a deeper sense of dread. He hurried to the farmhouse, trying again to call the same number. It wouldn't connect at all this time, as though his last message had locked him out. The unmarked phone displayed a single message in bold text. "Await contact." Roy stared, anger surging. They wanted him to wait, helpless, while that stolen cargo could be anywhere by now. But what could he do? He had no official resources or contacts beyond the local sheriff, who had no clue about hidden caches or clandestine operations. If this was truly a national security issue, the sheriff's involvement might create more chaos than clarity. Slamming the phone on the table, Roy ran a trembling hand through his hair. He looked at Baxter, whose anxious eyes seemed to ask what they would do next. "I don't know," Roy muttered, feeling foolish. He had spent his life solving concrete problems, broken fences, livestock ailments, orchard pests. This new world of espionage and deception was like quicksand sucking him in. He considered calling Evelyn the attorney, but what could she do? He'd signed non-disclosure papers, accepted hush-hush land deeds. Even if he wanted to come clean, the entire fiasco was buried under red tape and hidden agendas. At last, Roy forced himself to breathe, to think logically. Talia and Parrish had advanced knowledge, passcodes, Finch's name, references to the orchard. Possibly they were part of a rival faction. Or maybe they were from the same group, but acting under different orders, which might explain Finch's confusion. Roy's only clue was the mention of unfriendlies, who had apparently caught wind of the cargo. Could Talia and Parrish be those unfriendlies themselves? Or double agents? The possibilities spun in Roy's mind until he felt dizzy. He tried to piece together their exit route. The orchard was dense with dozens of paths. But once they reached the property line, there were only a few roads that led out of Maple County. He grabbed his truck keys, deciding to see if he could at least find tire tracks from the ATV or spot a pickup point. Perhaps he could glean something to report once Finch's side eventually called back. Piling into his old pickup with Baxter, he roared down the bumpy trail toward the orchard's rear boundary, scanning the ground for fresh prints. Sure enough, the ruts in a seldom-used trail behind the orchard showed narrower tire marks, likely from an ATV. Roy followed them until they veered onto a gravel track that led toward the county's old logging road. He kept going, dust billowing behind his truck. After 10 minutes, the track intersected with an abandoned logging route flanked by thick stands of pines. He slowed to a crawl, searching for further tracks, but soon lost them in the scattered pine needles. Cursing softly, Roy killed the engine. The logging road extended deeper into a remote corner of Maple County, eventually connecting with the highway. Talia and Parrish might have had a hidden pickup point, or they could have driven the ATV into a waiting truck. They were long gone. He slapped the steering wheel in frustration. He'd hoped for some sign, but it seemed they'd planned their exit well. He turned back, glancing at Baxter in the passenger seat. The dog huffed as though sharing Roy's exasperation. As the afternoon sun dipped, Roy returned to the farmhouse. The orchard was quiet, unremarkable, as though nothing of note had happened. He parked the truck and stood there, letting the warm breeze brush his face. A bitter realization took hold. All he could do was wait for Finch to respond. Any attempt to chase Talia and Parrish on his own was beyond his skill set. He trudged up to the porch, where the unmarked phone lay silent on the small table. Baxter settled at his feet, tail thumping softly. Roy stared at the phone, half expecting it to ring. Minutes ticked by. The dusk sky turned pink and orange, then slid into deeper purple. He felt alone and powerless. After all the times he'd watched spy thrillers on television, he never imagined a piece of that world would land in his barn. The thought would have been laughable if it weren't terrifying. Eventually, he gave up and retreated inside. He flipped on a single lamp, poured himself a stiff drink, and sank into his worn armchair, mind churning with regrets. Night brought little rest. Each shadow or stray noise jangled his nerves, prompting him to check the yard or ensure the barn was locked, though the box was gone. He half hoped Talia might reappear, apologetic. But the orchard lay silent under the moon. Sometime around midnight, Roy dozed in his chair. He woke at dawn with a sore back, and the phone still clutched in his hand, having never rung. The following day was a haze of anxious vigilance. Roy tried to do chores, feed his livestock, and water the orchard. But his focus was shattered. At intervals, he stood on the porch, scanning the horizon for helicopters, unmarked cars, or any unusual movement. By noon, he grew so desperate for direction that he tried calling Finch's line again. As before, it didn't connect. Only the same cryptic prompt: await contact. He forced down bitter resentment. They insisted on secrecy, yet offered no help when everything fell apart. Late that afternoon, just when Roy thought he might crack from tension, something broke the farm's silence. The distinctive hum of an approaching vehicle. He braced himself on the porch, rifle propped discreetly behind a chair. A silver sedan rolled up the dirt path. It looked ordinary enough, license plate caked with dust. Roy narrowed his eyes. A single occupant sat behind the wheel wearing a ball cap. The driver, parked near the barn, stepped out with cautious movements. "Mr. Henderson?" the driver called. Roy rose warily, seeing a young woman he didn't recognize. She lifted her cap, revealing dark hair pinned back. Her outfit was plain: jeans, a flannel shirt. Nothing about her screamed government operative. Yet Roy had been fooled before. He gripped the rifle handle. "Depends who's asking," he replied, voice guarded. She held her hands up to show no weapon. "Name's Valerie," she said. "I work with Finch. I know you have questions. Mind if I come up?" Roy studied her. She was slender, mid-30s maybe, face drawn as though carrying heavy burdens. He gestured to the porch, but didn't relinquish the rifle. "Talk," he said. Valerie climbed the steps slowly, a trace of apprehension in her eyes. Once she stood a few feet away, she removed a small ID badge from her back pocket, though Roy didn't see any formal government seal on it. She let him read it. But it seemed to reference a private security firm. "I'm part of Finch's extended team," Valerie explained quietly. "We got your message about the box. We're here to address complications." Roy felt a wave of relief that at least someone had come, but suspicion still gnawed at him. "Finch never said anything about sending you," he snapped. "And if your side is so organized, how did a couple of parachuting thieves walk off with that cargo?" Valerie winced, evidently stung by the accusation. "We had partial intel that infiltration was in progress," she admitted. "We tried to mobilize sooner, but there was a chain of command issue. That's all I can say." He cut her off with a frustrated gesture. "And now? I gave them the case. I've probably messed up your entire operation." He paced the porch, feeling Baxter press against his leg for comfort. Valerie took a measured breath. We understand you acted in good faith. This group that took the box, Talia and Parrish, belongs to a splinter cell with connections to certain foreign interests. They're using Finch's data to impersonate legitimate couriers. Roy's mouth went dry. So you're telling me they used passcodes your own people invented? Couldn't you have changed them or something? A flicker of shame crossed Valerie's face. We're not a monolith, Mr. Henderson. This entire arrangement was hush-hush even within the organization. Someone on our side shared the passcodes. It's an internal breach. The complexity is beyond your orchard, I'm afraid. She glanced at him with sympathy. I'm sorry you've been caught in this. Roy let out a ragged sigh, anger simmering behind his eyes. He didn't want pity. He wanted solutions. So what now? He demanded. Valerie paused before replying. Now we find Talia and Parrish before they can deliver that box to whomever hired them. With your cooperation, we might be able to track them. Roy frowned, uncertain how he could help. Valerie continued, They left a trail from your orchard. Did you see anything? Any leads? He explained the ATV tracks, the logging road, the likely route out of Maple County. Valerie nodded, jotting notes in a small pad. She seemed more prepared than the others who had visited, though Roy still felt burned by the entire fiasco. I'll pass this to our field agents, she said. We might have a chance to intercept them. If you recall any detail, the color of the ATV, any markings, call me. She handed Roy a slip of paper. This is my direct line. Roy studied the number, half expecting it to vanish or go dead like Finch's. Still, it was a lifeline. What about me? He asked, frustration and fear blending in his tone. If these unfriendlies want something more, am I safe? Valerie's expression turned grim. They might consider tying loose ends. Keep your guard up. We can post watchers near your farm, but that might attract attention. Roy's spirit sank. Even being protected would paint a target on him. I just want my life back, he whispered. Valerie's gaze softened. I understand, she said. I'll do what I can to expedite that. Before departing, Valerie offered a handshake. Roy hesitated, then accepted it. She promised to remain in contact. After her silver sedan disappeared down the dusty road, Roy stood on the porch, paper clutched in his hand, the setting sun washing everything in gold. The orchard still rustled with a gentle breeze, but it no longer felt serene. Danger might come from any direction, and Roy was left to wonder how deep the cracks ran within Finch's network. For the first time in weeks, Roy felt a glimmer of hope. True, the box was gone, and Talia and Parrish were out there, possibly delivering its contents to unknown buyers. But at least Valerie had appeared, acknowledging his ordeal and assuring him that Finch's people were on the case. The promise of eventual closure eased Roy's mind just enough to let him focus on day-to-day life. Even so, the orchard's gentle routine now seemed fraught with hidden perils. The morning after Valerie's visit, Roy rose before dawn and went about his chores methodically. He checked water levels for the cattle, inspected orchard rows for pests, and pruned a few branches weighted down by unripe apples. Baxter trailed him, alert and steady. In the back of Roy's mind, a persistent tension simmered, but at least he had a phone number for Valerie. He found some comfort in that slim connection, hoping she'd keep her word. By midday, the sun pounded the fields again, though not as brutally as during the worst of the heat wave. Roy paused by the barn for a drink of water, gaze drifting to the empty space where the metal case had once rested. An uneasy pang twisted his stomach. He could almost picture Talia's determined look, the calm efficiency with which she and Parrish had taken what they wanted. Frustration flared anew. None of this was his fault, yet everything felt like it was. He finished his water and brushed dust from his jeans, deciding to push the matter aside until Valerie reported back. A few hours later, Roy's phone buzzed in his shirt pocket. He froze, heart lurching. He tugged it free, expecting some cryptic directive from Finch's network. Instead, he saw Evelyn's name flashing on the screen. The call from his attorney friend reminded him of normalcy, a small reassurance. He swiped to answer. "Hey," he greeted, striving for calm. "Roy," Evelyn replied, sounding both concerned and relieved. "I've been trying to reach you for days. Are you all right?" He exhaled, forced a casual tone. "Busy with orchard stuff. Sorry, Evelyn. Everything okay?" There was a slight pause. "I'm not sure. Some men came by my office asking about your property paperwork, said they represented a land assessment firm, but the whole thing felt off. They wanted details on your new acreage, any improvements, and whether you plan to transfer the deed." Roy's stomach tightened. More strangers digging around, likely part of this tangled web. "What did you tell them?" he asked quietly. "I gave them nothing," Evelyn said. "Told them any inquiries needed your direct authorization. But Roy, they asked if you'd had unusual visitors. They specifically mentioned a possible security matter. Sounded official, but I suspect otherwise." Roy clenched his jaw. "Thanks for the heads up. If they return, stall them. I'll let you know if it's legit." He tried to keep the fear from his voice. The infiltration attempts were multiplying, proof that Talia's group wasn't alone in chasing that cargo. After hanging up, Roy cursed under his breath. He was sick of cryptic watchers and prying eyes. He hurried to the porch, searching for Valerie's slip of paper. Within minutes, he was dialing her number, heart pounding. The line rang twice before she answered. "Valerie speaking." Her voice was calm, but carried a professional edge. Roy told her about Evelyn's call, describing the suspicious men at the law office. Valerie let out a tired sigh. "They're working fast," she murmured. "It might be another offshoot group fishing for intel. Did they leave any credentials?" "Not with Evelyn," Roy replied. "They just asked a lot of questions. I'm worried they'll poke around the farm soon, or worse." Valerie paused. "We've got leads on Talia and Parrish, but nothing conclusive yet. I'll deploy a watcher to your perimeter for a few days. Very low-key, I promise. Meanwhile, if any strangers appear, keep your distance. Let my team handle it." Roy frowned, unsure about further watchers after everything that had happened. But if it kept his farm safe, maybe it was necessary. "Fine," he said. "I appreciate it." As he hung up, a gnawing doubt flickered. Valerie seemed sincere, but so had others who turned out to be liars. Still, he had to trust someone. That evening, Roy found himself restlessly pacing the orchard. The setting sun cast long shadows across the neat rows of apple trees, their leaves shimmering in dusky gold. Normally, he found solace among those quiet paths, the rhythmic rustle of branches soothing away the day's troubles. But tonight, anxiety trailed him like a shadow. He kept imagining covert eyes watching from behind every trunk, waiting to pounce. Baxter caught his mood, padding close at his heels. Night fell and the orchard turned quiet. Roy retreated to the farmhouse, checking every lock. He set a loaded rifle within easy reach, cursing the paranoia that had become his new normal. As he did so, headlights flickered through the window, a vehicle approaching up the farm road. Roy's pulse thundered. He grabbed the rifle, heart in his throat, prepared for another unwelcome confrontation. A single pickup rumbled into view, stopping near the porch. Roy relaxed when he recognized Jody Webb's battered truck. A neighbor, a friend, someone unconnected to espionage, he hoped. He eased the rifle aside and stepped onto the porch as Jody climbed down. She wore a grim look, dust swirling around her boots. "Roy," she called. "Sorry it's late. Got a problem with my well pump again. Mind if I borrow a spare part?" Relief washed over him. A normal request, a normal neighborly visit. He forced a polite smile. "Sure, come on in. I'll see what I've got." Inside the workshop, Roy rummaged through his supply boxes while Jody explained the persistent pump trouble. They chatted about harvest yields, local news, livestock prices. For a precious few minutes, Roy almost felt normal again. He found a suitable valve, handed it to Jody. "Try this. If it doesn't hold, I'll swing by tomorrow." She thanked him but lingered, gaze drifting around the workshop. "You sure you're all right? You look worn down," she said gently. Roy hesitated. Jody had known him for years and lying felt wrong, but he couldn't reveal the truth. "Just orchard stuff," he finally managed. "Economy's tough. You know how it is." She studied him, unconvinced, then nodded. "If you ever need help, you know where to find me." Roy swallowed a lump in his throat, grateful yet unable to confide further. They walked back outside, parting ways in a swirl of pickup headlights. Baxter watched from the porch, tail wagging uncertainly. Once Jody's truck vanished, Roy patted the dog's head, wishing he could unload his burden on someone else. Just for a moment. Days rolled by in a tense, watchful blur. Now and then, Roy glimpsed an unfamiliar SUV parked on a distant ridge, or saw movement in the orchard that disappeared before he could investigate. Twice, he tried to catch whoever was out there, but found nothing except footprints in soft ground. He suspected these were Valerie's watchers, though he was never completely sure. Whenever he called her, she admitted the situation was volatile, without providing details. She also confessed that Talia and Parrish were still at large. Roy felt stuck in a maddening loop. He no longer held the cargo, yet he remained under scrutiny from multiple factions. Tensions ratcheted higher when Evelyn called one afternoon to say more men had visited her office, this time hinting that Roy might be involved in criminal activities. She had refused to answer any questions, but the men implied they might file a legal challenge against Roy's ownership of the newly transferred parcel. He told Valerie, who only sighed, and repeated that, "They're trying to rattle you." Finally, late one evening, Roy's phone lit up with an actual voice call from Valerie. "We have a lead," she said. Her tone clipped. "A private airstrip, 2 counties over. There's chatter Talia and Parrish might attempt to transport the box out of state tomorrow night. We're moving in, but we need someone with local knowledge of the back roads to help intercept if they change routes. Are you willing?" Roy's heart slammed. The last thing he wanted was deeper involvement. But if Talia and Parrish succeeded in selling that cargo, who knew what havoc it might unleash? Maybe helping Valerie put an end to this once and for all would free him from suspicion. He cleared his throat. "Fine," he said, "but I'm not a trained agent." "We don't need an agent," she replied, her voice softening. "We need someone who can spot likely escape routes if they divert off the main highway. You know Maple County better than any of us." He nodded, tension coiled in his chest. "All right, tell me what to do." She promised to swing by in an unmarked vehicle early in the morning. Roy ended the call and sat in silence, swirling with dread and reluctant resolve. If Talia and Parrish were truly planning to run, perhaps this was Roy's one shot to keep them from escaping justice. He had a mental map of every dusty road and rickety bridge in the region. If that could help, then so be it. That night he hardly slept, imagining an impending confrontation. He pictured Talia, fierce and determined, protecting the box at gunpoint. He thought of Parrish, broad-shouldered and silent, ready for violence. Then he pictured Valerie, burdened by loyalties he scarcely understood, and Roy, just a farmer, roped into a conflict far beyond orchard fences. As dawn broke, he pulled on boots, loaded his rifle, and stepped outside into the fresh morning air, hoping he wasn't making a terrible mistake. Valerie arrived at Roy's farm in a dark sedan just after sunrise. He was already pacing the porch with Baxter at his side, heart jittery from too little sleep. At the sight of the car's tinted windows, Roy felt a jolt of anxiety, but he steeled himself. This was his choice, a chance to right the wrong he had unintentionally helped create. He shouldered a small duffel containing extra clothes, a water bottle, and a box of ammunition. Nothing about the day promised simplicity. Valerie stepped out in casual jeans and a gray jacket, hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She offered Roy a brisk nod. "You ready?" Her tone was gentler than before, almost apologetic, as if she understood the weight he carried. Roy set his jaw, glancing at Baxter, who looked crestfallen. "Stay," Roy murmured, kneeling to scratch the dog's ears. "I'll be back soon, boy." Then, summoning courage, he followed Valerie to the sedan. They pulled away, dust rising behind the tires, the orchard shrinking in the rearview mirror. The drive toward Riverton County, where the private airstrip lay, took nearly 2 hours. During that time, Valerie briefed Roy on the plan. Her team suspected Talia and Parrish had arranged a quick flight out under false identities, but they might pivot last minute if they sensed a trap. "We'll have agents on the ground at the airstrip," Valerie explained. "You and I will patrol the perimeter roads, watch for any suspicious vehicle that tries to detour. If we spot them, we call it in, then block their escape if possible." Roy tensed at the word block, picturing a forced confrontation. "We'll do what we must," Valerie added, catching his glance. "Don't engage unless it's life or death." Roy stared out the window, farmland rolling by in long, peaceful stretches. He hated the idea of turning these quiet back roads into an ambush site, but Talia and Parrish were on the brink of slipping away forever, possibly with something lethal or highly classified. "What exactly is in that box?" he asked finally, unable to keep the question bottled up any longer. Valerie's fingers tapped the steering wheel. "It's specialized technology," she said, voice taut. "Portable, advanced, potentially catastrophic if misused. That's as far as I can go." He nodded glumly. The secrecy felt endless. At least now he had a hint. Specialized technology, not mere papers or gold bars, something intangible and dangerous. He supposed that explained the frenzy among rival groups. Swallowing a surge of fear, Roy resolved to see this through, if only to free his conscience from the nightmare. The sedan turned onto a gravel road, and Valerie indicated a black SUV parked by a clump of trees ahead. "That's one of ours," she said. "We'll stop and coordinate." Inside the SUV, 2 men waited, Connors and Rivera, as Valerie introduced them. Both wore casual attire similar to hers, but their stances radiated training. They pored over a tablet displaying a satellite image of the small airstrip. "We have 6 watchers in place," Connors said, pointing at the image. "If Talia tries to board, we'll intercept at the tarmac. But we're short-staffed on the roads, so that's where you 2 come in." Rivera nodded at Roy, expression serious. "Valerie says you know these back routes better than any map. If they deviate, you can spot the likely path." Roy felt every eye on him. He cleared his throat. "Yes, sir. I can guess which roads they'd take to avoid main highways. Might be 3 or 4 major ones." He traced a line on the screen with his finger, uneasy at being the local expert. Here, and maybe this old route near Piper's Creek. Hardly anyone uses it, but it connects to Route 9. Connors tapped in notes, then offered Roy a comm device. "Keep us updated," he said. "We'll feed you any real-time intel from the airstrip." After a last exchange of instructions, Valerie and Roy returned to the sedan. They drove about 5 miles further, turning off onto a narrow lane that cut through dense pine forest. Valerie slowed near a clearing, parked behind thick brush, and turned off the engine. "We'll wait here," she said, checking her watch. "The flight's booked for early evening. If Talia arrives, we'll know within an hour or 2. Roy exhaled slowly, adrenaline already spiking. He hated the waiting, the sense that danger might erupt at any moment. Time crawled. The morning sun climbed higher, filtering through pine boughs. Valerie occasionally murmured updates into her earpiece, speaking in code that Roy barely followed. He sat in the passenger seat, scanning the tree line. Each rustle made his pulse jump. Eventually, Valerie passed Roy a thermos of coffee, which he accepted gratefully. "Wish we had better accommodations," she said with a rueful half-smile. Roy shrugged. "Better than my porch these days. At least we're doing something." Hours slipped by in tense silence. Around mid-afternoon, the radio crackled with an agent's voice. Unmarked SUV at the airstrip. 2 occupants. Female blonde, male stocky build, matching Talia and Parrish. They're approaching Hangar C. Roy's heart thumped. He turned to Valerie, who started the sedan and eased it back onto the road. "Let's be ready," she muttered. The voice continued. "They're holding a silver case. Confirmed visual. Team moving to intercept." Roy wiped sweaty palms on his jeans. At least Talia hadn't vanished. With luck, Finch's side would seize them now. Yet no sooner had that thought flashed than the radio burst again with urgent static. "They spotted us. The suspects are running. White van waiting near the fence line. They're loading the case, accelerating out. We're in pursuit." Valerie cursed under her breath, hitting the gas. "They might head south toward Route 10 or 9. Possibly Piper's Creek," Roy blurted, half to himself. "We can intercept if they come this way." She nodded sharply, eyes flicking to the rear view. The sedan's engine whined as they sped along the forested lane. The radio crackled. "Lost visual. They turned off on a side road, could be heading your direction." Valerie turned onto a dirt track, dust billowing behind them. Roy's pulse hammered as he mentally traced the terrain. If they keep going west, they'll meet that old logging trail that leads to Piper's Creek. "Let's check there," he suggested. They raced past pine stands, the path narrowing until branches scraped the sedan's sides. The air stank of churned earth and heated engine. Roy breathed shallowly, scanning for any sign of a white van or Talia's ATV. At each fork, Valerie paused to let Roy guide them, trusting his local knowledge. They passed a battered sign reading, "Road closed," ignoring it, bouncing over ruts that threatened the sedan's undercarriage. Over the radio, the tension mounted. Other agents reported possible sightings, but no confirmed location. Suddenly, a glimpse of white cut across Roy's peripheral vision. "There!" he cried, pointing to a flash of motion between the trees. Valerie jerked the wheel, turning onto a narrower dirt lane. Through the foliage, Roy caught a clearer view. A white van barreling ahead, tires throwing gravel. He glimpsed a figure in the passenger seat, short blonde hair. "That's Talia," he hissed. "They must have switched vehicles again." Valerie floored the accelerator, the sedan jolting as it pursued. Branches slapped the windshield. A swirl of dust kicked up. The white van careened around a bend, nearly tipping on 2 wheels. Roy's breath caught. The roads here were treacherous, easy to lose control. He prayed the van would slip into a ditch, but Talia or whoever drove it was skilled, keeping speed. The radio cackled with excited chatter. "We have them on your position. Move to contain." They emerged onto a broader logging road. The van skidded left, heading south. Valerie hammered the gas, drawing closer. Roy's stomach lurched at the sharp turns. He clutched the seat. Through the back window of the van, he saw Parrish's bulky outline, and next to him that same metal case, silver edges glinting in the gloom. Fury and relief mixed in Roy's chest. The cargo was in sight, so close and yet so far. Valerie tried to close the gap, but the van swung abruptly, cutting down a slope that led to a wooden bridge spanning Piper's Creek. The boards rattled under its weight. Roy's heart jumped. "That bridge is half rotten," he muttered. "They're taking a risk." Undeterred, Talia's van roared across, making it to the other side. A second later, Valerie angled the sedan to follow. The bridge groaned ominously beneath them. Roy tensed at the possibility of collapse, but they made it across, scraping by with a jolt that rattled his teeth. Once over the creek, the van took a sudden right onto a paved access road leading to an older county highway. Valerie and Roy shot out of the forest, the sun glaring in their eyes. For a moment, Roy blinked, disoriented by the brightness. Far ahead, the van's taillights weaved among light traffic. "They're blending in," Valerie growled. "We'll lose them on the highway." She activated a siren hidden under the sedan's grill, the wail piercing the rural quiet. Cars ahead pulled to the shoulder, letting the pursuit pass. Talia's van swerved around a tractor, then veered onto a side route. Valerie stuck close, pushing the sedan to its limits, the engine screaming. Roy caught fleeting glimpses of the silver case in the van's rear window. His mind drifted to the orchard, remembering how Talia had calmly lied about being from Finch's team. Now, she was one turn away from vanishing again. With a rush of speed, they closed enough distance that Roy dared roll down the window, rifle in hand, though he had no safe shot. The radio crackled. Another unit converging from the west. Then Talia's van jerked into a small gravel drive, leading to a cluster of abandoned warehouses. Valerie slammed the brakes to avoid overshooting. She spun the wheel, the sedan fishtailing on loose gravel, and barreled in after them. A swirl of dust choked the air. Roy coughed, eyes stinging, as the sedan came to a shuddering stop. Through the haze, he saw the van's door flung open. Parrish jumped out, brandishing a handgun. Talia hopped down on the driver's side, silver case clutched tight. Roy's heart pounded. They were less than 30 yards apart. Valerie shouted, "Freeze!" But Talia and Parrish bolted behind a crumbling warehouse wall. Roy and Valerie scrambled for cover behind the sedan, dust swirling, adrenaline surging. Roy's heart hammered as he crouched behind the sedan. The dusty air stung his lungs, and Valerie, pressed close beside him, murmured a clipped command into her radio. No response. They must have driven too deep into this abandoned property for a clear signal. Gun drawn, Valerie inched upward to peer through the cloud of gravel dust. Across the yard, the white van stood abandoned with both doors open. Talia and Parrish had disappeared behind crumbling concrete walls, the precious silver case likely clutched in their grip. A tense hush settled, broken only by the ticking of the sedan's engine and Roy's own pounding blood. He cast a sideways glance at Valerie. She nodded, indicating she'd circle left. Roy exhaled, trying to calm the tremor in his limbs. This was far from his orchard, from the small life he knew. Now it felt like he was in some half-forgotten war zone. Memories of the orchard's quiet evenings stabbed him, and he thought of Baxter waiting at home, blissfully unaware of the danger swirling around. He steadied his rifle and swallowed the lump of fear in his throat. They advanced in tandem, Valerie hugging the sedan's hood, Roy sliding along the passenger side. A swirl of dust thinned enough to glimpse part of the warehouse, a tall, battered structure of corrugated metal, windows missing their panes. To the right, a smaller cinder-block building loomed, half collapsed. Between them ran a gravel path scattered with old pallets. Roy's heart jolted when a flicker of movement appeared behind a leaning sheet of rusted metal. Valerie whispered, "Cover me," then dashed toward a stack of crates for better vantage. Roy planted one knee on the ground, rifle braced, scanning for Talia or Parrish. Each second stretched. The cloying taste of dust coated his tongue. A faint clank of metal from inside the warehouse made Roy's skin prickle. Talia could be slipping around to flank them. He gritted his teeth, determined not to let them vanish again. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed. A gunshot. Roy flinched, flattening himself behind the sedan door. The bullet pinged off the hood, sending sparks flying. Valerie dropped behind the crates, eyes narrowed. She gestured for Roy to move deeper into cover. He scrambled around the rear of the sedan, heart galloping. Another shot tore through the air, lodging in the ground mere feet away. A voice shouted from behind the warehouse wall, echoing over concrete. "Back off!" It was Talia, her accent more pronounced under strain. "We want no more bloodshed, but we'll shoot if you push us." Roy's throat went dry. He remembered Talia's stone-cold expression, how she had lied so smoothly about Finch's authorization. This was a woman who wouldn't hesitate to fire. Valerie steadied her pistol over the crate. "Talia!" she called, voice raised but steady. "There's nowhere to run. The perimeter's closing. Hand over the case." She paused, waiting for a response. Instead, Parrish roared, "We'll find a way out!" Then another shot rang out, clanging off the sedan's bumper. Roy winced. If they had enough ammo and cunning, they might slip away yet. Roy realized he was effectively pinned. The yard offered little cover aside from the sedan and a few scattered crates. Valerie tapped her radio again, desperation in her eyes, but the static hissed back uselessly. Roy grimaced. He needed to do something. They couldn't just hunker down while Talia and Parrish fled or circled around. Valerie crawled closer, whispering, "One of us draws their fire. The other flanks them from behind that cinder block shed." Roy's stomach churned, but he nodded. She pressed the sedan keys into his hand. "If you have a shot at the tires on the van, do it. They can't use that to escape. I'll circle wide." Without waiting for an answer, she darted off, keeping low behind rusted machinery. Roy braced himself at the sedan's front fender, peering over the hood. The white van sat about 15 yards away, parallel to a pile of bricks. If Talia or Parrish spotted him aiming for the tires, they'd open fire again. But if the van remained operational, they might still break free. He inhaled, then popped up, rifle lined on the rear tire. His finger squeezed the trigger. A deafening crack split the air, and the tire deflated with a hiss. Immediately, gunfire erupted from behind the warehouse. Bullets whistled overhead, and Roy ducked. He'd disabled one tire, but the front wheels remained. His heart thundered in his ears. A moment later, Valerie's voice echoed from the far side. "Freeze!" followed by a rapid exchange of shots. Roy heard Talia shout a foreign curse. Parrish yelled something unintelligible. Spurred by the distraction, Roy slid around the sedan to get a clearer angle. Dust still hung in the air, but he caught glimpses of two shapes huddling near a gap in the warehouse's steel wall. The silver case glinted in the late sunlight, so close Roy could practically reach out and yank it away if he dared cross the open yard. Steeling himself, Roy dashed to a closer set of pallets, taking advantage of Talia's focus on Valerie. Another barrage of gunfire rang out. Valerie was returning fire, forcing Talia and Parrish behind a rusted forklift. Roy exhaled shakily. He was no soldier, but desperation lent him a courage he hadn't known he possessed. If they managed to isolate Talia and Parrish, the cavalry might arrive soon. Just then, a flash of movement behind the forklift. Talia sprinted for the cinder block building, carrying the case in one arm and shooting wildly with the other. Parrish lumbered behind her, reloading on the move. Gravel crunched underfoot as they pressed deeper into the property. Roy realized with a jolt that they aimed to escape through the backside. He scrambled after them, ignoring the voice in his head screaming that this was madness. He crept along a wall of dented metal siding, each step slow and deliberate. Shots echoed sporadically from Valerie's position, but it sounded like she might have lost direct line of sight. Roy glimpsed Talia through a jagged hole in the wall. She was scanning for an exit, breathing hard, hair plastered to her forehead. The silver case looked heavy in her grip. Parrish stood guard, pistol raised. They hadn't seen Roy yet, but if he moved too quickly, he'd be exposed. A final sliver of daylight illuminated Talia's determined face as she said, "We're cornered, but we can break through the back fence. Hurry." She pointed, and Parrish nodded. They slipped around a corner, presumably heading for that fence line. Roy took a shaking breath. If they got past the fence, they'd vanish into the woods or commandeer a vehicle. This might be his only chance to stop them. Summoning every ounce of courage, Roy inched forward, pressing his back to the cold steel. He thought of the orchard, Finch's call for help, the fleeting normal life he'd once had. Then he stepped around the corner and raised his rifle. Talia startled, dropping to one knee, the silver case clattering beside her. Parrish spun, weapon aimed at Roy. Time seemed to slow as they stared each other down. Roy's pulse throbbed, but he kept his rifle on them, voice quavering. "Don't move. Put the guns down." He had no illusions about his own marksmanship. One wrong twitch could spell disaster. Talia's eyes flashed with anger. "Farmer, you have no idea what you're doing. Parrish's finger tightened on his trigger. "Let us pass," he snarled. "We'll forget we saw you." Roy steadied his stance. "I can't. Hand over the case." Even in the dim light, he saw the rage contorting Parrish's features. Talia's expression flickered between fury and desperation. She reached for the case, but Roy barked, "No!" Suddenly, Valerie's voice cut through the hush. "Drop it, both of you!" She appeared behind an old crate, pistol trained on Talia. That moment of distraction was enough. Parrish whipped his gun toward Valerie, eyes blazing. Instinct roaring, Roy jerked the rifle. A burst of adrenaline spiked and he squeezed the trigger. The recoil slammed his shoulder. A muzzle flash lit the gloom, echoing painfully. Parrish stumbled, a shocked grunt escaping him, then collapsed to the ground, clutching his shoulder. Talia cried out, eyes darting between Roy and Valerie. Her gun hand trembled, but she didn't fire. The silver case lay inches from her boot. Blood oozed across Parrish's shirt, and he groaned in pain, weapon clattering away. Valerie stepped forward, pistol locked on Talia. "It's over," she said, breath ragged. "Don't force us to shoot again." Talia's shoulders sagged in bitter defeat. The fight was done. She released her gun, letting it drop. Roy stood in stunned silence, rifle shaking in his grip. He'd shot a man. The realization sank in like a lead weight. Valerie moved swiftly, kicking away Talia's weapon. She pressed a call button on her belt, presumably summoning backup. Talia glared at Roy, voice thick with scorn. "You're a fool. You have no clue the power you've handed back to them." Roy's stomach twisted. He wasn't sure which them she meant, Finch's organization, some other group, or all the shadowy players combined. He saw Parrish rolling onto his side, wincing. Roy forced himself not to feel pity. The man had shot at him. Talia, panting with frustration, refused to look away from Roy. "You'll see," she muttered. "This changes nothing." Valerie knelt, retrieving the silver case. She brushed off the dust and glanced at Roy, relief and sympathy mingling in her eyes. "You did what you had to," she said softly. Then, in a louder tone, "Let's restrain them until the others arrive." Roy nodded numbly. He backed away, letting her cuff Talia and check Parrish's wound. The echoes of gunfire still rang in his ears, the tang of spent ammunition clinging to the air. With Talia disarmed and Parrish subdued, Roy looked at the battered metal box in Valerie's grip. He swallowed hard, chest tight. He expected relief, but only a hollow feeling churned inside him. Talia's warning echoed, "You have no clue the power you've handed back." Roy locked eyes with the silver case. Maybe it was best if it vanished from his life forever. But some part of him feared Talia was right, and that he'd never truly be free of the consequences. A single siren wailed through the dusty air of the abandoned lot, and Roy finally let himself breathe. The echo of gunfire still pulsed in his ears. He lowered his rifle, arms shaking, while Valerie kept her pistol trained on Talia. Parrish lay on his side, groaning, blood soaking his shirt where Roy's bullet had struck his shoulder. In the distance, headlights bobbed closer, revealing an approaching vehicle. Whether it belonged to Finch's team or local law enforcement, Roy could only guess. He felt every second stretch into an unbearable weight, a swirl of dust settling around them in the fading evening light. When a black SUV rumbled into the open yard, Roy steeled himself for whatever came next. Two men in tactical gear jumped out, weapons raised. Valerie quickly signaled them with a coded hand motion. "Friendly," she called. "We have suspects down. Cargo secured." The men advanced cautiously, stepping over broken pallets and debris. At the sight of Talia kneeling and Parrish clutching his shoulder, they relaxed enough to holster their sidearms. One of them bent to check Parrish's wound, pressing gauze to staunch the bleeding. Roy leaned against a rusted crate, fighting the urge to collapse from sheer adrenaline crash. It was over. At least the chase was. Talia glared, a silent fury burning in her eyes, while the silver case lay at Valerie's feet. Every muscle in Roy's body ached from tension. He thought back to Talia's final warning, "You have no idea the power you've handed back to them." A chill prickled across his skin. He reminded himself that Talia had shot at him, deceived him, and stolen the cargo. Yet, uncertainty lingered, a part of him wondering if her words held truth. Valerie directed one of the tactical men to secure Talia's wrists with zip ties. Her gaze flicked to Roy, concern evident. "You all right?" she asked quietly. He only nodded, swallowing hard. He'd fired a bullet into another human being. The memory of that split second, the recoil, the muzzle flash, lodged in his mind. He hoped Parrish survived. He hadn't meant to kill anyone, just to protect himself and stop them from fleeing. Another SUV arrived, this one bearing an older figure in a blazer. Stepping out, he removed tinted glasses, scanning the scene with a grim set to his jaw. Roy recognized him from earlier descriptions. This had to be Finch, or at least someone from his inner circle. The man ignored Talia's furious glare and walked straight to Valerie, then stooped over the silver case. With a practiced touch, he confirmed it was intact. Only then did he look at Roy. "Mr. Henderson," he said, voice low and weighted with seriousness. "I'm sorry you had to be here. You've risked much for us." Roy managed a ragged nod. "And who exactly is us?" The man sighed. "That's not something I can fully explain, not here. But trust that you did the right thing. This technology is safe now, thanks to you." Roy tasted bitterness on his tongue. Talia claimed otherwise, but he lacked the strength to argue. Instead, he just listened. Paramedics arrived soon after, checking Parrish's wound and loading him onto a stretcher. Talia spat insults as they dragged her into the next vehicle, accusing them of treachery. Finch's men offered no response. They simply ushered her away. Within an hour, the old warehouses felt emptier than before, the last glow of sunset painting the yard in dull oranges. Roy found himself leaning on Valerie's sedan, exhausted to the bone, while she quietly debriefed with Finch. At length, Valerie returned, face reflecting a swirl of relief and regret. "We'll be taking statements, then clearing the site," she told Roy. "Some local authorities have been notified, enough to keep the official story simple. Property trespassing, a minor firefight with unknown suspects, but you won't be implicated." Roy drew a shuddering breath. He recalled Talia's intense stare, her accusations, the bullet lodging in Parrish's shoulder. Nothing about this felt minor. "What now?" he asked, voice trembling with fatigue. Valerie's expression softened. "Now you go home," she said gently. "Finch wants to speak with you tomorrow. He'll meet you at your farm. We'll finalize the final details to ensure no further threats. It's over, Roy." She gestured to the silver case, carried reverently by two operatives into an armored van. "That's going where it belongs. You won't have to guard it anymore." Roy almost collapsed with relief, though a kernel of doubt remained. Would his life truly return to normal? Or was Talia's warning correct, that the device's power could spark new turmoil? He said nothing, shoulders sagging. Valerie must have sensed his turmoil. She placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'll drive you back," she said. "We'll sort the rest out once you've rested." The ride was quiet, both of them drained. Roy gazed out the window, farmland sliding by under a moonlit sky. He tried to imagine returning to the orchard, feeding Baxter, waking up early for chores. As if reading his mind, Valerie softly said, "You did good. I know it doesn't feel that way, but you stopped them from taking that cargo out of the country. That's no small thing." He gave a hollow nod. "Doesn't feel heroic. Just feels like a mess." She pursed her lips, agreeing quietly. "It often does." Soon, the sedan turned onto Maple County's roads. Roy recognized the battered fence lines and familiar fields. A wave of emotion swelled in him. He realized how deeply he missed the simplicity. By the time they reached his driveway, dawn's earliest glow tinted the horizon. Valerie parked, handing Roy a small card with direct contact details. "If anything unsettles you or people come sniffing around, call me. My personal phone is on there." Roy studied the card. Her eyes held kindness, a flicker of camaraderie. He managed a wan smile. "Thanks," he said softly. "And thanks for believing me." With that, he slipped from the sedan, stepping onto his porch with heavy limbs. Valerie watched him for a moment, then drove off, headlights cutting through the early morning haze. Inside, Baxter greeted him with frantic tail wags, whining as if sensing Roy's stress. The dog's soft fur offered comfort. Roy hadn't realized he needed so badly. He crouched down, burying his face in the thick scruff. "It's over," he whispered, hoping to make it true. Then he trudged to the kitchen for a glass of water, ignoring the faint trembling in his hands. The orchard lay outside, silent and unchanging, waiting for the day's labor. But Roy's mind buzzed, too keyed up for rest. Instead, he paced the living room, waiting for sunrise. When dawn finally spread its golden light across Henderson Farm, Roy forced himself into motion. He fed the cattle, checked the orchard irrigation, and offered Baxter a treat. Bit by bit, those tasks steadied his nerves. The crisp smell of dew on grass reminded him that not all had been tainted. Even after a night of gunfire and abductions, nature carried on. By mid-morning, he sat on the porch swing, half dozing, lulled by the orchard's rhythmic rustle. A rumble of an engine roused him. He opened bleary eyes to see a sleek SUV approaching. Out stepped Finch, wearing pressed slacks and a dark jacket. Roy stood, bracing for complicated talk. Finch offered a polite nod. "Thanks for agreeing to meet," he said. "I know you're tired." Roy led him onto the porch, gesturing to a seat. Baxter eyed the newcomer with mild suspicion, but stayed calm. Finch got to the point. "We have Talia and Parrish in custody. The box is safe in our facility. Valerie explained you took a shot in that confrontation. I know that's difficult." Roy swallowed, guilt and relief intermingling. Finch continued gently. "Parrish is alive. He'll recover." Roy's shoulders eased. He hadn't wanted blood on his hands, but it felt unavoidable. Finch set a folder on the porch table. "These are final documents. You'll receive official recognition for your help, though it's classified. Also, the ownership of that extra parcel remains yours, no strings attached. As for Donovan," he added, surprising Roy, "he's been fully debriefed. He sends his gratitude, though he can't contact you directly." Roy recalled Donovan's exhausted face that first night, the man he'd let rest in the barn. Picking up the folder, Roy flicked through pages of dense text. "So, what now?" he asked, voice tight. Finch exhaled, his gaze drifting to the orchard. "Now you go back to your life. If a new threat arises, we'll handle it. You've done more than enough." He paused, then offered Roy a small business card with only a phone number. "If you ever sense lingering danger or have questions, call me. But hopefully, you'll never need to." Roy stared at the card, recalling Talia's cryptic claim that returning the cargo to these people might unleash greater forces. "How do I trust that the box won't cause more trouble?" he asked, a flash of defiance in his tone. Finch's expression tightened. "I can't offer absolute guarantees, Mr. Henderson. The world is complex. But I can promise we're better custodians than those who'd exploit it. Your role here is done." For a long moment, Roy balanced the card between his fingers. Then he sighed. "All right," he said. A shaky acceptance, but acceptance nonetheless. Finch stood, gave a curt nod, and walked back to his SUV. The engine's hum faded down the dirt road, leaving Roy alone on the porch, Baxter at his feet. He closed his eyes, allowing a breeze to ruffle his hair. It felt surreal, as though the last few weeks had been some outlandish dream. Still, the bullet holes in that old warehouse and the memory of pulling the trigger proved it all too real. Would Maple County's quiet ever feel the same? A day later, Roy found himself tending his orchard with a lingering ache in his soul, though physically unscathed. Neighbors like Jody and Evelyn noticed he seemed distant, yet he could only smile faintly and deflect their concerns. Even so, the orchard's routine began to soothe him. The chatter of birds, the rustle of leaves, the warmth of sunlight on his back. It was all part of the life he knew. Late that afternoon, Roy stood by the fence, gazing at the orchard's edge. The sun's rays slanted low, casting long shadows across rows of apple trees. Baxter pressed against his leg, tail gently wagging. Roy let out a slow breath. The chaos had passed, at least for now. The orchard was still his, the threat gone. Or was it? A tremor of doubt remained, Talia's warning echoing in memory. But Roy also remembered Donovan's grateful face and Finch's final words. He had to believe that right had prevailed. As he watched the sky deepen into gold, Roy couldn't help pondering, was the price of his kindness worth it? He'd saved Donovan once, yet that single act plunged him into a spiral of secrets and violence. Still, he told himself, how could a person stand by when another needed help? Roy patted Baxter's head, reminding himself that decency shouldn't be a regret. If his orchard's quiet existence had taught him anything, it was that genuine compassion held more value than any hush-hush cargo. In the end, all Roy could do was live on. Strangers might still lurk, or powerful forces might scheme behind curtains, but he had done his part. The orchard's harvest approached, promising a modest but healthy yield. Evelyn would handle the property extension's final details, and maybe Jody would need a spare part for her well pump again. Life's small routines would continue, overshadowing the memory of that sealed metal box. Some days, Roy would likely peer up at the sky, half expecting to see a helicopter descending. Other times, the slightest noise in the orchard at night might jolt him awake. But each dawn, he'd walk through the neat rows of apple trees with Baxter at his side, determined to reclaim normalcy. And if the phone ever buzzed again with some coded message, he would face it, because that was all he could do, no more and no less. Finch might vanish back into the shadows, Donovan might be off on his next covert mission, and Talia's words might remain an uneasy whisper in the back of Roy's mind. Yet the orchard would endure. Roy Henderson, a simple farmer, had stood against a hidden threat, returning the power to the side he hoped was just. Whether it was the right choice or not might never be fully clear. But as Baxter nosed against him, and the sun dipped lower, Roy breathed the scent of apples and cut grass, and he found a fragile peace in that moment, grateful, at least, to stand in the quiet hush of Maple County once again.